it's David from Geeky Guys. I'm here today with my good mate Steve. We're here to talk about some of the things which are massively on trend at the moment, early computers, retro gaming. We're going to do a bit of a Geeky Guys complete history, starting off with the early computers, the early acorns and micros, going up to the first consoles, PCs, Amigas, and then the later consoles. In this edition, we're just going to concentrate on the early stuff. So to start off, the Acorn computers, the Atom, which was then renamed the BBC Micro, developed by Herman Hauser and Chris Curry in 1978. That was probably about my first experience in computers in primary school, playing adventure text-type games, and then little classics such as Elite, Chucky Egg, Defender, Lode Runner, Arkanoid, Centipede, Paperboy, Donkey Kong. That was probably my first experience of it. I don't know about you, Steve. Did
Absolutely.
you play on any of the micros or acorns at school?
Yeah, so for me it was more kind of the old school type games like your SimCity, your Tetris. But what got me was the very massive floppy disk that used to get the 5.2s. They were,
Yeah, 5.25 floppy disks,
yeah,
like paper. They were great, weren't they?
good fans as well.
Good fans if you got hot in the summer, and very easy to split and break, as anybody will know if they ever played with those discs.
Yep, and I don't know about you, but my experience is every person and teacher always used to store them on top of the monitor. How the hell they ever worked in a few days, I do not know. But
yeah, they got hot, and a lot of the games and discs got warped, didn't they? I think I said to you earlier, when I was at school we were quite lucky because we had a teacher who was a big computer nerd, and he programmed his own games on the early Acorn computers, especially on the micro, and he'd get me and my mate Paul, not Paul from Geeky Guys by the way, another Paul, to test out his games. So we used to go in there at lunchtime and sometimes miss half a lesson playing games and get into trouble. So that was the my first experience of it, really. One of the crazy things was, even though it was back in the late 70s, early 80s, this still started off at £235, which is what you'd pay for a new console today, for a bit more, for like a PS4 or an Xbox One. But they still sold over 1.5 million units. So they were obviously quite popular. Obviously schools bought most of them, I would imagine, rather than home use. But they did really well and they're really popular. They were going from the late 70s till mid 90s. And then I think on from then, the next experience was probably like the Atari Pong and the Atari 2600, which was a 8-bit console, 128 bytes of RAM. That came out in 77, and you could get that in a wood veneer type of plastic. And I remember going to relatives and playing with that, and you didn't even have proper joysticks or paddles. You just had like this weird plastic things with spheres on it to go up and down, and a couple of buttons which were hit and miss whether they worked or not, to play games such as Pong, and they had like a basketball game, Centipede, Asteroids. I don't know whether you ever played on like the early Atari consoles.
I did. I mean, I'm more of the ZX Spectrum generation, but the early Ataris, yeah. It was the wait times for loading games that really got me. It's 35 to 40 minutes wait.
Yeah, sometimes they could be quite a long time for those games. I mean, the consoles were not so bad, but the later Ataris with like the tapes, used to take ages. You get the silly noise and have to wait at least 10 minutes to play a game, and possibly turn the tape over to play the last part of the game, which was fine if side 2 worked. If it didn't, then you were stuck playing half a game and you couldn't complete it, which was really annoying. But the consoles, the early Atari ones, were really popular, sold over 30 million units. You could play either with a ROM cartridge, or some of them had a wire to connect a tape player. They sold 7 million units of their best-selling game, which was Pac-Man. And they were very popular, and there was a lot of games came out for that. Air Sea Battle, Starship Street Racer, Yar's Revenge, E.T., the less said about that, probably the best. An Indiana Jones game, which was a little bit hit and miss. Pitfall, Centipede, Space Invaders, Asteroids, Missile Command, River Raid, they were all pretty popular. And even things like Defender, Cubert, the first Mario Brothers, which was pretty much like Donkey Kong, and Dig Dug, which was a very popular game, especially in the States. And they just had a a big mention of that game on the Netflix series Stranger Things. That was brought in season 2 of that. They had all the kids were playing on the arcade machine with Dig Dug on it. Galaxian, Pinball, Moon Patrol, Battleships, Rampage, the list goes on. It made so many popular games, and so many games which are still popular today. People play them on emulation and on the new consoles that are coming out to play the retro games. They had a lot of the top early programmers back in those days as well, in the early 80s, with David Crane, Warren Robinette, Howard Scott Warshaw, who's very big even now, commenting on games, and he talks in a lot of blogs about how they used to program the old games and how difficult it was, and how much fun they had as well programming the games back at Atari headquarters. They even had Colin Meninsky, who was like one of the first female games programmers, which was a big thing back then for a woman to come into a male-orientated environment and to be programming games and popular games as well. So that was a massive thing for Atari, and they were well respected for their machines as well. They sold a hell of a lot, and even were the first people to bring in the custom processor chips with 1.79 megahertz, which made the games quicker than a lot of the earlier ones and allowed them to program such brilliant games as well. Going on from that, obviously the Micros, the early Ataris, we then had, of course, something that you quite well experienced with the ZX Spectrum.
Yep.
The ZX Spectrum 128, developed by Clive Sinclair, of course, who also had like the Sinclair C1 car, which didn't do too well.
I think it's better for his computers.
He expected everybody to be driving him around in the future, but didn't quite happen. They came out in 23rd of April 1982, and they were sold for over 10 years using the Sinclair Basic Language operating system, which was brand new at the time. And you could get those in black and white and also in colour as well. Sold over 5 million units of those, but we ought to say that's not including the dodgy Timex Russian and other clones that they had across Europe that would set on fire after about 10 minutes a lot of the time. I'm sure a lot of people got burnt with those old machines back in the day. And again, that most of those games were run by cassette tape, taking ages to load, or 3-inch floppy disk could be connected as well, which made it a little bit quicker. You could also get a ZX Micro drive, but that had a lot of problems and failed the vast majority of the time, so it was mainly tapes that most people programmed the games for. I'm sure you remember a lot of the games for the Spectrum, especially the Dizzy ones.
Yeah, Dizzy was probably one of the greatest games, one of my biggest pet peeves. That thing I burnt hours on.
Yeah, it was one of them we said earlier where you had 3 lives, 4 if you were lucky, and you had to play the whole game, go through hours and hours and hours and hours, avoiding spiders and crocodiles and water, fire,
lava pits, and
yeah, all in the attempt to get Zack the Wizard and rescue your family. So a lot of people like us wasted hours and hours on those games. From Codemasters and the Oliver Twins, it went on to make a hell of a lot of popular games for the Spectrum, the Commodore, Atari and the Amstrad. As we said, the Dizzy games were very popular. Bomb Jack, Gauntlet, Paperboy, Commando, Sentinel, Bubble Bobble, Elite, Manic Miner, and you even had like an early Football Manager on that as well, which was very, very basic, and we're going to spawn lots of versions of that game through the years. Super Hang-On, which was obviously a really good motorbike racing game. Chase HQ, Daley Thompson's Decathlon, where a lot of people broke joysticks with those over the years.
Yeah, you had to get crazy just to get that guy to win on.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't just press right or left to run. You literally had to bash the joystick left and right to get the power up to run quick, and then press your button at the right time to make him do a high jump or jump over a jump, or to do a high jump, something like that. So that was a lot of fun, but it destroyed a lot of joysticks and cost people's parents a lot of money. But yeah, there was a lot of people were making games then as well. We've mentioned Codemasters with the Darlings, the Oliver Twins, Andrew and Philip Oliver, Ocean Activision, Acclaim, Imagine Software, Scion, Silversoft, Arcade Software, Micro Amiga, Microsphere, Virgin Games started off on the Spectrum, Softtech, US Gold, and even one of the big companies who would later produce a lot of console games, Konami, started off producing games for Spectrum as well. So it was a highly popular machine, and there was a hell of a lot of very classic games that did really well. And I think it was probably one of the better earlier home computers, wasn't it?
It certainly was. I mean, it just goes to show that these companies that we still hear of now producing games, just how far back they go.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking
years.
80s, yeah, over 20 years ago they've been making games. And people don't realise they started off on these early home computers, and how difficult they were to program as well. When I remember seeing an interview a few weeks ago with the Oliver twins, and they were saying when they first started developing games for the Spectrum, they actually had to create the software to create the games because people hadn't already produced it when the machine came out. There were originally obviously a lot for teaching and in schools, and so the gaming aspect wasn't a massive thing for those machines early on, and so a lot of these developers actually had to work together to develop the program, to create the art and to make it possible to create the games. So it wasn't easy at all. I remember certainly one Christmas morning when I wanted a ZX Spectrum and I got a Commodore 64. It wasn't necessarily the machine that I wanted, but actually it did the job. It was a bit difficult to program, and I think a lot of people have said that in the past as well. It was a lot harder to code for C64 than it was for Spectrum.
Yeah, Spectrum used to get a manual, and at the back of that manual there was about 4 or 5 different games you could program, like your table tennis ones, etc. And I myself personally had a go at coding the table tennis one. To do that when you're a kid, like 7 or 8, compared to what you've got to code with nowadays, it's an emotional experience, to say the least. And you've typed all this code out, you've attempted to save it to a tape, and then you wait 10 minutes for it to load. Yeah. And then you find out that you've missed a comma.
Yeah, if you've missed a letter or a comma or a number somewhere on a line, it completely screws the whole thing. And it's not easy to fix. You've literally got to go back, count through all through it, and even start again sometimes. I mean, I remember when I first had my C64, there's a similar thing they had, like in the back pages, they had like a few pages of code that you could use to write programs in the C64 language, Commodore Basic. But they were like simple things, like it would print your name on the screen so many 100 times, or it'd make the screen flash, or it'd create a noise of like a child laughing or something like that. And even just to do something basic like that was reams and reams of code. So you can just imagine what it was like to create quite a big game on those machines. It must have taken absolute months and months and months of nearly 24 hours a day just typing in code to make it work, and hope you didn't make a mistake when you was tired, because you'd be really, really annoyed, wouldn't you, when you went back to play it and you'd miss something.
Yeah, coding back then was completely different to what it is now. There's no object-orientated language or anything like that. It literally was a script.
But I think, like we said earlier, there was a lot of people back then though who were actually making their own games, even though it was hard, and it really pissed me off at times. People were making their own games and their own programs on these machines, which is different to today, where it's all just the big companies that are making them and people just buy the consoles and play them. I don't think even people are like creating their own games for PC or anything like that so much now, are they?
There is a small to medium ground market for it, but unless you've got the actual buy-in from sponsors and all the marketing behind you, it's very hard to get your game out there. Yeah. I mean, bear in mind mobile phone market now, especially for your Androids, like the guy who created Angry Birds. I mean, it's a very simple concept, but that's drawn films and all sorts of merchandise. So it just goes to show a simple idea can take you very far if you let it.
Yeah, if you let it and you get it right, you can certainly do that. And I think we ought to mention the C64 a little bit, with it being a machine that I had. Was released in January 1982 by the US firm Commodore International. Manufactured by their own ARM Commodore business machines. Starting price, unbelievably, was really expensive, even more than the Spectrum. It started off at $595. So if kids in America were getting Commodore 64s for Christmas, they were doing well, weren't they?
Extremely well.
$1,000, and they got a computer, so it was a lot of money. And I think they did drop the price quite quickly after that, especially for Europe, because people would never have paid that, would they, for something like that?
No, it would be very overkill price-wise for over here.
So that was mad. So that was crazy when it started, but I'm sure a few people did have rich parents and they did get them. It sold over 17 million units. The C64 name was taken from the fact, very basically, that it had 64 kilobytes of RAM. And it's actually in the Guinness World Record books as the highest selling single computer model of all time. Which seems a bit weird when you've just said it's $595. Somehow it's still the highest selling computer model of all time. So they must have dropped the price pretty quickly, and people must have been willing to pay for it because they liked it, I presume.
Well, you got a very good marketing department.
Yeah, they must have done for that, blimey. It was discontinued in April 1994. It did have a predecessor, the Commodore VIC-20, which I remember a friend had, and it was very, very dodgy. Used to set on fire quite easily, and I don't think there was many games for it. I think it was very much a teaching machine, and that was another one they had in schools as well. So the C64 really was the one that brought Commodore into the gaming arena. I think they actually sold 2 million units a year between 83 and 86. The updated model, which I had, also had a cartridge slot on the back, which helped you out with the game loading times. That was a lot quicker and a lot smoother, but not many people developed games for cartridge early on, unfortunately.
No, that was part of the problem. Even though you got some of this new tech that were coming out,
Yeah.
everyone had already their favourite games and things.
Yeah.
And
Did you have a cartridge slot on the back of your Spectrum, or was it just
no,
tape?
I had to. When I bought the Spectrum, it just came with a tape deck built into it, as everyone knows. But I had to buy a device called Kempston, which was like an add-on to the motherboard at the back. But the problem with that was it was not a very good connector. So if you didn't line it perfectly, or you pulled on your joystick cable and that pulled out slightly, you could just totally fry the board.
Right,
So I was like 3 ZX Spectrums on within a year.
Blimey. I think there does seem to be a bit of a pattern here, that it was quite easy to set your machine on fire back in the 80s if things didn't line up quite correctly, or if your power supply was a bit too close to the unit, or something could melt the keyboard. Do you remember hearing about that happening? So yeah, that was the C64. I also had another friend who had one of the Amstrad computers, and he had the CPC 464. CPC, if anybody doesn't know, just stood for Colour Personal Computer, so it wasn't anything fancy. Just literally just said what it was on the tin. It was another 8-bit home computer from Sir Alan Sugar of Apprentice fame, and it was sold from 1984 until 1990. Didn't do as well as some of the other machines. I think it only sold about 3 million.
Yeah,
initially.
You had some stiff competition around that time, so
yeah,
it's not surprising that the figures were around about that.
Yeah, and I think Amstrad at the time were well known for like hi-fis and like TVs and stuff, and so people are going, "What the hell's this Amstrad computer?"
It's a good venture into the market, absolutely.
Yeah.
But he did have some stiff competition around that time.
It was one of his early ventures into, obviously, being a big entrepreneur. He saw that gaming and computers had just come in, and it was making a lot of money, and a lot of people getting into that area. So it was something for him to grab onto, definitely to make some money. Again, the Amstrad had a built-in cassette player, similar to the Amstrad. You could later on add a disk drive for a 3-inch floppy disk. And there was also a 64 kilobyte or 128 kilobyte option. And later on, they even gave you the chance to expand to 576 kilobyte, which you could do, but I don't think any of the games really made use of that extra anyway. So it probably wasn't worth spending a load of money to do that. They also did the CPC 664, CPC 612128, a 464 Plus, and a 6128 Plus. The last two were not really all that successful and didn't get anywhere. Alan Sugar's last attempt was to try and create an early Amstrad console, which I'd never heard about, the GX4000. Don't know if that's one you've ever come across.
No, it sounds very Terminator-y.
Yeah, GX4000 for the future. But apparently that fell a bit flat on its arse before it got going. It was going to cost a lot of money. I think a lot of the technology they needed to make it work was maybe a few years away, so he probably tried to jump into the arena console too soon. One of the things that people probably don't realise is that during the production of the CPC 464, the team called it Arnold. Probably a lot of people won't know that, but that's something they did as an in-joke at Amstrad HQ. It's quite interesting that Amstrad's group technical consultant at the time just wanted to reiterate to people that Alan Sugar was no Steve Jobs. He was literally just dipping his feet in the water. He didn't have the knowledge. He was just trying to make a fast buck on this upcoming trend. The starting cost for a green screen Amstrad was $199. There's also a colour screen option at $299. So I'd imagine there's a lot of kids were pushing the parents for the colour version at £300. And really, you would want that, wouldn't you? Because a green screen would be like very similar to like the early Ataris and stuff, once it was black and white.
Yeah, you wouldn't get the true
Better
benefit
colour.
of it.
And remember earlier on as well, Alan Sugar, when he first started with his Amstrads, was in a pub, and he got talking to two long-haired man who said, "Hey, we can write an operating system for your new Amstrad computer. We'll do it within a month." And he thought, "Oh, I've had a bit of luck here. I've met some people that have got more knowledge than me. They can sort my machine out, and they'll be able to do it really quickly." So he paid him some money and said, "Yeah, go ahead, go and do it. Let me know when you've done it." Didn't hear anything. Stress levels were rising within Amstrad HQ. When somebody from the department went to find out what was happening, they found a coder drunk at home. He was unable to work. He was in a bit of a mess. They looked at what they'd done, and the result was just reams of unusable and unintelligible code. Alan Sugar realised he'd made a bit of a foobar, spent some money and got some professionals to sort it out. So the early days of the Amstrad were certainly not smooth, to say the least.
You've got to love the comparison of the British to American. So
Yeah.
in America, you've got your Silicon Valley, all your coders working on these programs in garages and stuff.
Yeah.
Britain, we go down the pub.
Go down the pub. I'll do that.
Find two
There's a
drunks.
pint. There's a pint. Buy me a packet of nuts. I'll do it for you. Yeah, that doesn't work. That's definitely not the way forward when you're trying to create
Not
a computer.
business model, people.
That's not good. But yeah, I mean, going back to completing the trinity of the early home computers, they also had quite a few Atari models as well. Obviously, they started off with the 2600 and the Pong, which were consoles. But the guys over at Atari, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, they wanted to get in on the home computing arena. So they produced quite a few models like the Atari 400, the 800, the ST, 5200. And then the ones which probably did the best and the ones that I was familiar with was the Atari XL and the Atari XE, which was another 8-bit computer. Came out in the early 80s and was processed until 1992 using the MOS technology and the 6502 CPU, which was at the time, I believe, one of the most advanced CPUs and boards that was out there.
So that's one of the fastest you could get.
Yeah, it was like more advanced than Spectrum, the Commodore, the Amstrad, or anything. So this certainly had a few extra rungs climbed on the ladder before they even started. They were also using, as we mentioned earlier, the custom coprocessor chips. And one of the first games, Star Raiders, was a very popular game, sold over 4 million units. Starting price again for the early Atari home computers was quite expensive again, starting at $550 up to $1,000. But it still sold quite a few. Again, it had cassette or disk drive options. And again, for that you could get a lot of the games that we've already mentioned, for like the Spectrums and the Amstrads, like the Dizzy games and the Daley Thompson's Decathlon and tennis. I think even perhaps one of the early PGA Golfs was on that as well. Ghostbusters obviously was a big game on that as well. And there was, I think, to be honest, there was just a lot of really good games for that as well, wasn't there? Same as the Amstrad and the Spectrum.
Yeah, there's quite a few games ported from different consoles across. because technology was better. They improved the graphics. Version 2's come out on them, so
and
good to go.
The only thing they did do is they did, because of the technology that was putting into the machine, they did have to go from 4 joystick ports down to 2 to fit everything in, which meant obviously the earlier consoles you could have 4 plugged in at one time and have split screens and things, so they had to take those out, but I think that was a good idea because it made it a better machine. Made it a lot quicker, technology was better, so it was worth doing.
It was as well. I mean, they also did a bit of a kind of survey at the time to say, well, how many people actually have 4 people playing at once?
Yeah.
And majority was 2 people.
Majority was 2 player.
Yeah.
I mean, even like now, it's difficult to get 4 people together to play a game, isn't it? 'Cause people are busy or
Exactly.
don't like the same games, and so you're better with 2 anyway. So they probably made a good call there.
It was a good call. I mean, you think about it, back then you had your 14-inch TVs. Which
Oh
were
god,
nuts,
yeah.
and nowadays we're talking 65, 70 inch.
Oh god, you can play on massive screens now. I mean, I remember when I started, I had like a 14-inch like Matsui portable TV for like me, like my Commodore 64, and even my Amiga. I played a bit of stuff on that one. Didn't play through monitors. So yeah, it was very basic back then, and like you say, people today have got big 50, 60-inch TVs that they don't know the bun. They've not played on a green and black screen or a black and white screen, or
Absolutely.
so yeah, they ought to feel lucky. I think that pretty much covers what we're going to go through at the minute on the early days of computing. Next time we're going to have a look at the Amigas and the early PCs, Amiga 600, 1200. Might even have a look at the CD32 because that's one that you had.
So the CD32, that was the world's first
32-bit console, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we did play a lot of really good games, a lot like Simon the Sorcerer, which was good
Chris
fun.
Barry.
Chris Barry, doing the voice of Simon. I think that was one of the earliest sort of games that kind of had actual speech, didn't it, for the characters? Usually it was just speech bubbles or text at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably cover a lot more of those kind of adventure type games, such as your Monkey Island, etc.
Oh yeah, that was massively
section, but,
popular. That was a great game.
As David was saying, it's one of the first ones that did the speech.
Yeah, I think it was. If it wasn't the first, it was certainly one of the very early ones. I think just to finish, we did a poll a couple of days ago. Obviously, we're going to cover a little bit more of this in the next couple of parts of this history of computing. But we asked people what their favourite 1990s first-person shooter game was, the old FPS. The options we gave, unfortunately, only 4, because that's the only amount that Twitter will allow you. Unfortunately, damn them. And we put, they need to fix that. We need at least 6. So we went for the classics. We went for Doom, Quake, Half-Life, Duke Nukem. These are all games that we enjoyed playing back in the day. And again, talking about creating software, they had to build an entirely new type of software for a first-person shooter game. So it was different from an up and down or a side-scrolling adventure. It was literally creating a 3D world. Once it was the first attempts at like having a character in a 3D world and interacting with things around it.
It was great. I mean, this is where you got stuck in walls and
there's plenty of bugs in that as well, aren't there?
through floors and all sorts of things. So.
Walk to a certain place and you fall to your death, or you just keep falling for 10 years. If you didn't turn your computer off, you'd probably carry on falling, or you get a weird beeping noise or something. So yeah, they did have the problems, but we had a lot of fun playing them. I mean, especially remember like playing Quake, and back then, like we said earlier, you had to bring your computer to your friend's house, your tower, your monitor, your cables, everything.
Yeah, many times we'd be on push bikes with tower cases strapped to our backs and cables on there.
Linking up via either 56k modem or serial cable, which was good fun. But we certainly had a lot of fun playing like Quake and Duke Nukem, Half-Life, to each other's houses doing that.
I mean, that was the thing. I mean, nowadays it's so easy just to hit connect and you're in the room and you're playing your game with your friends.
Pick your friend from the list, click connect, and you're done.
I mean, back then, it was an experience. Half the afternoon just to get a game going.
Yeah, you had to find your friend first. You had to put certain commands in just so it would link and it would find you, be on the same server, just so you could find each other to play. So that was good fun. And we did mention earlier as well that some of these games allowed you to make your own levels as well. So going back to the early days of like programming games, on some of these later ones that actually let you create your own levels. I remember we had a lot of fun running around the Enterprise on Duke Nukem, creating some really weird sort of landscapes on Quake and stuff that you could mess about with.
Yeah, the best one I think was the Duke Nukem one with this. Can you describe it as like a cave area? There was a building. We used to put the trip mines everywhere and grenades and hidden traps and all sorts of stuff.
That was the thing. You could actually trap each other on that. It wasn't just about finding each other and shooting each other. You could actually set like laser trip bombs and pipe bombs in lifts, so when they went in, you press fire and it kills them. And they're just thinking, where the hell did that come from? So yeah, we had a lot of fun in that. I mean, obviously we had the days at school we linked up with Serial Cable, about 6 of us playing Duke. Lunch times, which teachers really loved. Walking in, just hear the colourful language and all the gunfire and the flipping bombs going off and people kicking crap out of each other. So yeah, that didn't last long, and then that kind of got banned, didn't it?
I think we got about 2 weeks out of that, didn't we?
Yeah, it was a really good idea. It was like, right, who fancies playing that? Yeah, that'll be fucking brilliant at dinner time. We'll bring some cables in, we'll link them up. And it was fine for the first few days, and then teachers started hearing all this noise, all this shit, all this ruckus going on, and find us playing these first-person shooters and obliterating the crap out of each other. So yeah, that was good fun. And like you say, you could create your own levels and then get people to join in and run around the levels you've created together, setting traps and blowing each other up. So yeah, I think a lot of that comes into the winner of this poll as well. Starting at the bottom, one that surprised me a little bit is Half-Life.
Yeah, absolutely.
With 6%.
Half-Life was classic.
That was a massive game back at the time. It was one of the most popular ones and sort of blew everybody away when it came out with its graphics, how smooth it run, and there was more of a story in that as well.
What else I was going to say is it's not really much the shooter side of things.
No.
That was pretty well established. It was the actual story element.
Yeah, you had a story element in there, and you knew what team you was with and what you was doing, and it wasn't just blindly shooting things. It was you were going through a story and going through a mission, so to speak. So yeah, Half-Life on 6%. The next one is one we just mentioned back there is Quake with 24%. There was a couple of those games. I think they may have even done a third one later on as well.
They did Quake 3 and 4 eventually. I mean, I think Quake 3 was probably about the most popular one, I would say.
Yeah, that did really well. And that was another one you could play online and link up and play together as well. That was very, very much more a fancy element one. Once it was going killing monsters and weird beasts and aliens and all kinds of whatever they could throw at you. There were weird stuff, and it was probably one of the most bloody ones as well. There's quite a lot of blood and stuff in that.
Yep, absolutely.
So we had a lot of fun playing Quake. The next one, thought this one might win it. It was the old classic Doom, which is probably about one of the first ones that I played. And I think the first time I played it was probably on like a demo, on like the front of a magazine or something. Back in the days when they used to give you a demo or a full game on the front of the magazine with some sellotape with like a power select tape or a disc or whatever.
That's the thing. I mean, buying games back then was an actual experience. You got a proper box that it came in and a manual. It was a collectible item.
Yeah, and you had all the artwork and stuff as well. It was pretty massive. So yeah, I mean that was back in the days when they did that. I don't think they do that so much now. Very rare that you get games on front of magazines now.
Ones, but...
Yeah, probably the odd special ththings or anniversaries they'll perhaps do something. But yeah, I used to have a lot of fun playing the demos. That's probably where I first came across Doom, and that probably paved the way for the rest of them, didn't it? That was the first one that made that engine and that software work, and then people just did either tributes to that or tried to make it better. And I think probably in the terms of making it better, that probably comes to our winner with Duke Nukem on 41%. And with that took a lot of the things from Doom, Quake, Half-Life, but packaged it in a completely different way.
There was a story with Duke.
Yeah, there was a story. The character was very well devised and very popular. He had a range of weapons.
And catchphrases.
And catchphrases as well. Let's rock.
Yep.
Come get some. Get over here. You're going to die. All that stuff. That was all you could pretty much hear on most people's computers back in the mid-90s. Just all that just going off amidst gunfire and sirens and crap and roaring of aliens and pig police and stuff like that, blowing up urinals, drinking from toilets to get your health back, and blowing extinguishers and up and stuff.
Wasn't that one of the first ones that had strippers in as well?
Yeah, I know there's bits where you go into the cinema and you could put like a porn film on the cinema screen, couldn't you? You could go into like shows, and there was like girls dancing on tables and stages and things, which was, as we said, was a completely different thing to what they had in the other games.
Yeah.
It was more of a world. It was fantastical. They had loads of different stuff going on every area you went into, and they had the fun things like the laser trip bombs and the pipe bombs that you could leave around and blow things up. It wasn't just get something in front of you and shoot it. There was a tactical element as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a good couple of level bosses in there as well, which were quite spectacular for that type of game.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was bits where you had like an RPG, and you could stand at like a vantage point and then wait for the person that you was up against to kind of come into shot, and they'd just get blown up and die from nowhere, just run out of a tunnel and blow up and be like, where the hell did that come from? Yeah, and it's like somebody who's out of view for been firing at you.
It was like one of the last levels in the game as well, like a soccer field that you're on.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
I remember that being quite crazy and hard to finish as well.
But yeah, it was just such a good game, and they had a few sequels. Probably the second one was pretty good. Duke 3D, Duke Nukem Forever didn't do so well. No. I think kind of that was, they were milking it a little bit by then, weren't they? And
it was trying to grab the last of the franchise.
Yeah,
really.
There wasn't much new. I think there was talk at one point about doing a movie, and that didn't happen. It probably could work. You could see how that character probably would work in Mercenary. You know,
Rock doing it.
They get you could get some hair, blonde, bleach blonde, spark it up. And obviously somebody like Dolph Lundgren would have been quite good for that. I would have had the hair and the body shape for it. And you could just imagine you got somebody, the character like that, you drop him on an alien world, give him a mission, it pretty much would be Duke Nukem, wouldn't it? So yeah, if you want to make one, people out there, that'd be a way of doing it, and it'd be good. But yeah, I think that covers it for this first part. As I say, in the next part we'll be looking at the Amigas, CD32, and perhaps have a look at something like the early PC stuff as well, and the old fun on the Amigas of loading a game with 36 discs.
Yep.
Which was hours and hours of fun.
Beneath the Steel Sky with 17 discs.
Yeah, I mean, like the Monkey Island ones were about 30 discs.
Monkey Island wasn't that bad. It was like between, I think, about 4 and 6 discs off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't remember. I know there were some though that were like silly amounts of discs, and you like go and buy the game, and the carrier bag would be cutting through your hands because it got like 50 discs in it or something and be cutting through. But yeah, that's one that we'll go into next time. And obviously, if you've got any suggestions, Steve, we'll have a look at that
Absolutely.
as well.
We'll get some good games listed and
we'll go through it a bit more. All right, I think that's us for now. We'll catch you next time. Bye.